So, this is the testimony of Daniel Saint Germain, a man, and back to being born forward. Some of the elements are there, but this is a man's testimony. I was born in 1963 on January 11th, the youngest of 7 sons, one on top of the other. My mom and dad had 7 sons in 10 years. It was 10 years, 1 month, 6 days between the youngest and the oldest. Again, as before, it is my testimony. I remember just prior to being born, coming out of the womb, I was in a place neither hot nor cold, kind of like floating. The analogy that I related that I seen later in my young adulthood was that movie Cocoon. I was in something, and it was light, and I heard a voice. Will you go for me? Of course I will. And I don't know if it was minutes. I believe it was fairly fast. And I came out. I remember the bright light, blurry. I was scared. I was horrified. I didn't want to come out. They pulled me out. They cut my mother's belly. I seen the light, and they pulled me out. I didn't have a choice because I wouldn't come out. I didn't want to leave. I was in the flesh then, and that's the end of that. It's always been there, as vivid as this today, standing before you. I remember everything. If somebody mentions something, like I said, I remember it every single day, every minute. No, but I do. If the conversation comes up, I remember that day. I remember everything. Anyway, I was the youngest of 7 sons, and I remember sitting there and hearing my brothers talk at like 3 months old, and my family, and I was coming along, and I understood every word they were saying, just as much as now, meaning and everything. I just couldn't respond. I used to grab at their lips and their tongues. I used to stick my fingers in their mouth. And I used to scream, "Hey!" and get frustrated because I couldn't respond to them. And they loved me then. Didn't last long. My big brothers loved me. They were the most ones that took care of me. My mom and dad had so many kids, and they kept tight ranks. Everybody got a bag lunch for school in the morning. I wasn't old enough yet. Everybody was home every night at 5 for dinner. Everybody was in when the street lights went on. Even my brothers were teenagers, and I was 5 or 6. They were big kids. I'm 5'11". I fluctuate between 100. I can go anywhere from 165 to 190 pounds in a week to this day, depending on whether I'm working, if I'm hustling and doing something. If I'm sitting, I shrink right down. But my brothers were big boys, even in like grammar school and junior high and high school when I was younger. They had a reputation because they were big, but their reputation wasn't bad. They weren't thugs. So it relates to me. a few minutes. They wouldn't hurt anybody, but they protected everybody. We were pretty much alone by the time I was 5, 6, 7. So my mom and my dad had been previously a Grand Knight in the Knights of Columbus when I was born. And by 1965, by the time I was 2.5, he was done with that. He was also a speaker of Christian doctrine in the Catholic Church. I remember going to church at 2 and 3 years old. All my brothers had to go to church. They went to catechism. They went every Sunday to church. I didn't have to go. What my dad was doing was to speak of Christian doctrine, and that was only about a year that I had to go, and I was still very small. By the time I was 3, I was done with that. I never had to go to that Catholic church, that big place, and I never liked them. I always felt funny in there. I was always afraid. See, I had big brothers, but I was always afraid. I wasn't a wimp. I don't know what I was afraid of. But I spent every hour of every day of my life in fear back then. By the time I was 6 years old, 7 years old, my 2 oldest brothers were old enough to go to quit school and get a job. My mother and father, my dad was a federal civil rights litigator in the civil rights era and movements. I grew up in marches that they organized with Jacob J. Gordon, the banker, belonged to Commerce Banks in central Massachusetts, and Samuel Silver, a retired Army colonel who owned a bunch of hardware store right in the center of downtown Worcester. But we lived in the ghetto. We were broke. My dad, and as you'll see later in my testimony, we don't take our licenses to practice law. We could pass the bar like that. But under the oath of the bar, you can't challenge the bench. That means you can't go against the judge. But when you know the law and the rules of procedure and the canons, it's totally legitimate, and you're supposed to. That's the way the system is. But when you take the bar has nothing to do with the court. That was something that they brought in collaterally on the side. The system was broken anyway from the beginning, but I won't get into that about it. And I grew up listening to my dad on the telephone, talking law, quoting law. This guy would just rip it right out. Sam, Article 4, Section 3 of the Penal Code, the Federal Penal Code clearly states, and you just quote, in 28 U.S.C. subsection 1915, we're coming under that, and proceeded for improperous, because I can do that because I'm disabled, but my father never collected Social Security from the government. But I used to listen to this conversation. He was always on radio talk shows. This is still in the 60s, coming into the late 60s, 68, 69. I remember that first, whatever you want to call it, that space moon thing, whatever they were doing. I was there, I watched it on the black and white TV, and was there one which you put the cellophane over it to make it color. You had red and you had blue, and you put the cellophane over the screen. We had the turntable over there. My brothers used to play their rock and roll, Jimi Hendrix and all that stuff, so I grew up in music all the time in the house. And they had stereos when they got jobs. And it came down to my mother was a waitress at that time at a place called Stewart's Diner, one of those little trailer things. And I used to go with my dad at about 4, 5, and 6 years old to pick her up from work. But remember, they were heavily involved in organizing things, working with Sam and Jake. They didn't give us money, things like that. My mother was the first woman in the United States. Jacob J. Gordon was a very wealthy banker. And in 1972, he got on the independent ticket to run for president of the United States. He took my mother as his running mate, Shirley Ann St. Germain. My father was the genius behind it all. with all of them, in the law, and everything. I grew up knowing who the Rothschilds were, and I always understood that they weren't the top. They were the front men for the top. You know, the Warburgs, the Schiffs for the top. Those are the ones that the Rothschilds moved into the mansion with after they took over the currency. But before he sent the 5 cents out. I won't get into that in this video. There's plenty of videos in my thing on those things. I knew everything. When I was 7 years old, you see, at this time my brothers were being pushed, and my mom and dad would be gone. My mother traveling the country. I would go by 2nd grade. This is 2nd grade. I would go in the class, and did anybody see this is public school in the ghetto? Did anybody see Dan's mom on TV last night? And I was always embarrassed. My parents were well known. And they ended up going after Jake Gordon. He had to flee the country for fraud because of what in his campaign across the country, he had campaign workers. And what they started doing was taking the flyers and things for the election and putting them in people's mailboxes. Although Jake and Sam were Ashkenazi Jews, I learned from them the truth. 5, 6, 7 years old. Hearing my dad on the phone, and when they would come over, see, I was the youngest one, so I was there, my other brothers would be out playing. I could go out, I just never went out. I didn't want to go out. My mom and dad used to get on vacation and yell at me to go out and play, and I wouldn't. I was afraid, and I know what I was afraid of. And I wasn't a weak kid. I never understood. I always knew, and I was always wanting to learn something. I was always listening and watching everything. I was a very quiet, shy kid in this huge family. I was totally withdrawn and quiet, always watching, listening, absorbing everything. And there was always this little voice, and I knew that I had to learn everything. I just experienced it. I used to jump into everything. I would just run right into whatever the situation was, we'll say, to experience it. I just had this desire to experience everything. And I did. So I was 7 years old. It was in the summer. My brother David, who died a little over a year ago, 3rd to the youngest. We were at this place called 1010 Main Street. It's a big old brick, like house, tiny mansion. Just square, nothing fancy. It was across the street from McDonald's in Main South. This is all ghetto. And ghetto. But we had Puerto Rican ghetto. There wasn't a lot of blacks in my area. They were in another section adjacent to our neighborhood. Where I lived, you had the French area. You had in Main South originally, but that's where the Puerto Ricans had moved into by 69, 70, 71. One family moved in the whole thing because that's when they were migrating. There was some big thing coming out of Puerto Rico, and they just flooded the area. In 2 years, it went from all French, that whole neighborhood in the 10-block area, to a lot of Puerto Ricans, but the French were still there. But we had the French area in Main South. You had the north end was the Irish. The Shrewsbury Street area going into the town of Shrewsbury, but in the city was the Italians. You had the Jews up on anyway, going up in the Holden. And it was split, and that's the way it was. And my brothers were stuck. They had to watch me. They had to take care of me. They didn't want to. They kind of was like a tag along, but somebody had to watch me. So my brother David took me, and that was the first time I got drunk at 7. I drank what they used to call a GI, the big quarts of Budweiser. And we went back to 1010 Main Street with this kid Brian and John and my brother David. And they had got somebody to buy. He was sent to some fun package store. Somebody bought for us little kids, or them little kids. And they gave me my GI, and I sucked that baby down probably in about 5 or 10 minutes. I smoked my first joint that day. I was trashed. We went home, it was dark, and we were late because we were supposed to be in when the streetlights went on. It was a little bit after. And I do remember, but I was puking my guts out. If there's a blackout, I was there. It was like a half a blackout, but I do remember it. And my mother started screaming, my baby's drunk. My baby's drunk. And they kind of got on David, but David was drunk too, and he wasn't much older than me. Within a few weeks, I did my first hit of four-way window pane acid, and I was chasing cars down Main Street. Got that from David too. We used to walk down the middle of Main Street when we were straight. During the day, if I was going to go to the boys' club downtown, which is about 10 blocks away, going into Worcester Center in the downtown area, coming out of the ghetto there, we used to walk up my street and get in the middle of the road where the line is and the cars going both ways, and just walk down the middle of the street the whole way. I was crazy. We were all crazy. Suicidal. But we never hurt anybody. This is a big thing. My brothers never hurt anybody. And my mom and dad were always helping people, except for us. They were too busy. He spent a lot of time talking, and I was at his feet because I was little. And I got a lot. I mean, a lot. And I absorbed it. And then I got my paper route at about 8 or 9, and my brothers all had paper routes. My father always said, I'm not paying you guys to work in the house to do your chores. We lived in a 3-decker, to clean your room. He's not going to give no allowance. You want to make money, you go outside and do that. You're not getting nothing here. Which was, we all understood that was the right thing to do. So we used to go out, me and Jimmy, for our paper routes in the morning, every morning. 5:30 or so, and sit on the front steps and look up the street. Next to us were a 3-decker. There was another white family across the street, LaHare's, and then there was a black family and a cottage there. Those were only two cottages, and then there was a cottage up on the other side with a big barn, and that was Pa. He owned a little convenience store, Blue Front Market, around the corner. Back when a gallon of milk was 25 cents, I remember going to the store. Back when penny candy was running through a dime and had a whole big bag. I used to crack up when I was a kid at my dad's old war stories, and now I grew up later, years later, and today I look back and I say, hey, yeah, you're an old man telling those same old stories. Go to the movies all day for a nickel, my dad used to talk about. But we used to sit on those stairs and wait for the papers, because a lot of times it rained a lot. It always seemed to be raining in the morning, a lot in those days. And we used to watch the military trucks come down like twice a week, a Jeep and a big 2.5 truck. And they would dump heroin. The building next to us was 4 stories high, split in the middle with like big apartments. And it had like 20 apartments in it. And there was a little garden terrace, a little dirt thing. There was a court, and there was houses in there, 3-deckers. And on the other side, this was the building. It was one of those big old brick, but the big block, rough red brick buildings. And it had about 20 or 30 apartments in it. Dump. And that's where a lot of Puerto Ricans lived at first. That's where they filled that place up, and they used to sit outside all day and night playing their bongos and singing and going on and on. And so today I can listen to anything. You can put a baby in front of me screaming and crying. Not that I don't pay attention to them. Nothing bothers me with sound. I can just sit through anything. You can go 20 hours, I'll just sit here. Nothing drives me nuts. I have tolerance for noise. Nothing. Well, most people don't. Some things drive me crazy. But we used to watch those military trucks chop up heroin. And in those days, that building was the center distribution point coming out of Fort Devens, Massachusetts, for heroin throughout the United States. That was the main place. And I understood, and my father told us and explained. He explained everything to us as kids. He used to sit us down because he didn't have us a lot, because he was always busy. But he would sit us down and lecture us for 2 or 3 hours straight. And when Dad started talking, you shut your mouth. He was a little stocky guy. He was about 5'7". He had arms like this. He was my father. My father was a stocky little guy. Well, my brothers were big in their 20s. My father and they were in their peak. My father used to put his forearm out like this and say, "Go ahead." And my brothers would punch him in the hand as hard as they could, and it didn't even move. I used to tell him, "Don't screw with me. I don't care how big you get. I'll kick your ass all over the place." And we all knew it. And he did. My brothers used to get in fights. Every once in a while, it wasn't often. My father wouldn't tolerate it. He stayed tight. When the oldest one got in fights, boy, appliances were moving when they were throwing each other around the kitchen. My dad would come in and kick the shit out of them. And these weren't fights. My brothers were bad. And again, they never hurt anybody. They didn't do that. I remember in 1973. See, these things affect me. This is my testimony when I get older. See, I'm observing all of this. I'm watching all of this. I'm learning from them at this point. And I'm still drinking, okay? On the weekends, I'm doing stuff, and all that's going on in the bathroom from the age 7 on, and smoking pot. Acid wasn't so frequent. That was the first time that I did that. I mentioned, and I didn't do it again until I was, 11 years old. Yeah, right. 3 years, 11. In any event, in 1973, just before the weekend before that Thanksgiving week, my brothers were hanging around in a bar in Worcester, the Blarney Stone, and people used to seek them out. You know, teenagers and guys in their early 20s or mid 20s. They would seek them out to go and start fights to hear about these big guys. Because once in a while, when something did happen, you know, somebody's being bullied or somebody's being messed with, one of my brothers would step in. But there's one thing they never did, and one thing my father didn't allow, is if one brother had an issue with somebody, none of the brothers that got involved. Your brothers didn't stick up for you like that. Unless you were outnumbered or that was way over your age. Within a year or two of your age, that's it. And that's a big difference when you were a kid. And somebody went to the Blarney Stone, and I was home. Jimmy was out somewhere playing with his friends, but somebody went to the Blarney Stone and told my brothers that there was a bunch of kids, a bunch of guys, beating up their 2 little brothers, Danny and Jimmy, down at Crystal Park. And it's about 2 blocks away from that bar, so they ran out of that bar. My brother Ralph and my brother Jerry. Ralph was 4th to the youngest. Jerry was 2nd to the oldest, next to the oldest. So there was one between them. Ralph was a Golden Gloves boxer, and he was very good. He was a bad little boy. He was like this, but he could swing. He'd tear your face off with a punch. Jerry was a different story. He was an animal. He'd pick you up by the face and throw you. And these are kids who were just old enough to be in the barbell. And Ralph, I don't think was. I think he was a year younger. Yeah, Ralph was. Ralph was 17 and Jerry was 20. And they went down that park. And they go up on their hill. And there's nobody there. And all of a sudden these cars pull up. 4 cars. Total of 17 men. Early 20s to mid 20s. They jumped out. They jumped out. They jumped out. Ran up that hill with pipes and chains. And started going after my brothers. I know the story because it was in the paper the next day. At first, my brother Ralph was piled by these guys and they were beating him. My brother Jerry was peeling guys off his back, knocking them all out, one shot. When he got free, he went over and started pulling them off of Ralph. And then Ralph got in his groove. And by the time it was over, in a few minutes, every one of those guys wound up in the hospital, severely injured, badly. Broken bones, fractured faces, arms, legs. And my brothers were arrested. And we always kept everything from Grandma and Grandpa Cinchman. They were like the Norman Rockwell grandparents. And tried to hide that one, but it was on the front page of the paper. that morning when they came over for Thanksgiving dinner. Amazingly, Grandpa was proud because he knew his grandsons weren't a bunch of bullies, and he knew there was something to this. And they were home at that point, my dad. And as you can tell, I still live in the greatest neighborhood because I don't need to. I like being where I come from. In any event, so now as I'm growing up there at about that age, I'm heavy into reading. I read. We Are Not the First. It was a book of the Count Saint Germain. This family that I was born into, this Saint Germain, 7 generations ago, this guy, his name was Count Saint Germain. He was a double agent spy. He was one of the wealthiest men in the world. He was one of these alchemist sorcerers. He fled France just before the Napoleonic War. And if you look at him, you can get him on Leonard Nimoy on In Search of It. There was a lot of things done on this scumbag, total scum. And he went into England because he was England's spy and France's spy working for the kings. They're under sheriffs, they used to call them back then. Like the sheriff of Nottingham in France. The sheriff was out to get him, kill him. So he fled. But the king loved him. And they both knew what he was doing. They were all playing both sides. And he went into England, and his name was Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon was head of all the Masons' lodges. That's what Benjamin Franklin was over for 18 years dealing with. And whenever he was out, that's why when Francis Bacon was in France, Benjamin Franklin would be the head Mason in England. And then when Bacon, the Count Saint Germain, would be in England, then he would go to France, Benjamin Franklin. So I was studying this sucker. My dad and everybody, my dad and my grandpa took it as pride right from the first. I knew this was evil scum. I wanted to know about this. I wanted to know where I came from as far as I knew then in the body. But I never forgot that I was sent. That was always vivid. Just didn't know what it was. But I did know. And my brothers used to say to me after they all did catechism, but by the time it got to me, and my father had it with the church, and I never had to do catechism or do any of that. I was delivered from that, like that. And I studied law. I used to take my dad's books, his federal code books, his federal rule of procedure books. I used to read them, just like a fairy tale. I used to read case law books. This is the case of Spradley versus State. In this case, Spradley was, and they tell a story. It's a story. And I used to just read the story. And some of them were car thefts that were big and got turned over, for Supreme Court decisions, or Ferretta versus California, Miranda versus Arizona, and Miranda rights. These are stories. They're stories. So I just read them. I thought they were pretty cool. And I read a lot of them. I'm talking grammar school. By the time I was getting later in grammar school, and my brother started moving up and getting married, I started having issues. And I didn't want to go to school because school was boring. I just looked out the window. They were teaching me things I already know, spelling, all that stuff. And they see me on here and the misspellings. That's because they mess with my keys, and I'm not going to deal with it. I write too much. I write novels a day on here. And there's an error here and there, I'm sure, but 99% of it, they're changing my letters, and I don't care. Most High told me long ago, don't worry about it. It pisses everybody off. Give them something to work on. And he meant it. But I didn't do it on purpose. But I just got sick of fixing it. But I didn't. He says leave him out of it. So I will. Most High. So anyway, I went off into private boarding school, Hillside School in Marlborough, Massachusetts. It seems to be a school for, there was some elite there, But what they do too is the Jesuits and these kids that they snag, they put them in these schools, the Jesuit-based schools. And the CEOs from Raytheon and IBM and everything to do with the military industrial complex, hotels, the Sheraton Hotel, president. Um, they used to come and sit every Friday night at dinner at the headmaster's table, and we would sit down the table, each side, and each one of us, there was a teacher. All the teachers lived on campus, and our teachers were scholars, even those early years. Our geography teacher lived in Egypt, South Africa, China. Everybody we had was first-hand. Our French teacher was from America, but spent many years in France studying the arts and all that. So this is the type of teachers we had. And the teacher to his right was a waiter, one of the kids, and we always wore suit coats and ties and slacks to every meal, to school. It was required. And a lot of my friends had those family crests. And that's why I know about family crest, and I know about the Rothschild family crest, and it's in other videos. My dad wanted me to, he found out family crest from this Count St. Germain scum. I didn't want to wear it. I didn't wear it. He said I'd fit in more. My dad wasn't trying to get me so much in with them. He wanted me to get in with them. He wanted me, his dreams were that I would go in with them, that I would go up into this thing, that I would drag my brothers and my whole family along in the coattails. That was my dad's dream. Like a Kennedy thing. There was a lot of pressure for me, a lot of responsibility. And then I went on into high school at St. Andrew's School in Barrington, Rhode Island, that you could throw a rock over to. It was that close. The block we were on was like a mile square, and that was the whole campus. And the science teacher, I remember him, his oldest son was one of the top 10 pianists in the world. He had just won a scholarship at Juilliard on a worldwide competition. And that's where I first started getting into strings. And I never took lessons in playing any strings or any music. I just kind of picked it up and it just kind of went from there. And I was just always interested. I just loved strings. And it just went. That simple. And then, so I went to school and I studied. And when I was there, I was studying law. I was studying ancient Hebrew law, right out of the Bible. Although I wasn't dealing with the Bible. I was studying your laws, because that's where all the laws stem from. Because as I researched backwards, when I went from American law, that's what I did. I studied Massachusetts state criminal law, and then it doesn't take long. I got through that in about a month. Everything, and I remember it all. I just could remember everything, what page, what paragraph, what subsection A, paragraph 3, subsection A, or subsection C, and I could just talk. And my dad had it, and his friends had it, and that was that. And I liked it. I thought it was pretty cool. And in our dorms, we were alone at night. We had our own rooms with the closet here and the mirror and the dresser. It was all built into the wall with the bed and drawers underneath. There were nice, classy rooms, and the doors were open every night. And the teachers would walk. They lived in the dorms. They were our dorm parents also. My French teacher and his wife were dorm parents, and then their helper was one of the science teachers, a younger guy. And Bobby Hilton was one of my closest friends, who's at the top of the Hilton called Dynasty today. Stacy Lazard, who went on, and me and him were studying, and we were studying at that young age, and we were already qualified to be international maritime lawyers for the bankers, even in 9th grade. We loved it. Today he's chief counsel of the International Monetary Fund in France. I learned all the things I learned. I didn't get them off of YouTube, and I didn't learn about these people and things in books. I knew them. and we used to compete in sports, and I was top in the track and field. Uh, I remember Mark Kennedy was supposed to be the best at St. Mark's here in Massachusetts, and first time I got went against him in a 440, I left him in the dust. My coach told me, just stay behind him, Dan. Danny, stay behind him. Let him set the pace. You're going to kill this kid. Well, I didn't listen to him. I set the pace. He was almost a full lap behind me when I finished. And same thing with baseball. I had a curved sinker. I was left-handed, but I threw my arm up because they had me practicing with a softball. I really drove it home, and it ended up throwing my shoulder out, so I never did that again. And of course, I studied sports back then when I was involved in that. And then I realized where they came from, that they were wrong. And I didn't think a lot about it, but I knew what it was, and I knew it was nothing. There was something not good about it. So I never got involved in watching football, baseball, basketball. I was never into sports. I used to, even, and when I was 17, I did a burglary on the weekend. And I went to court, and my dad says, you got yourself in this thing, get yourself out of it. And I went to court, and they charged me burglary, breaking and entering in the nighttime. And so I researched a little law. It didn't take me long, a couple hours on that. And I went into court. I had to file my own almanac because they accept that as far as sunrise and sunsets. And I moved for dismissal based on the fact I was improperly charged, and I moved to bar further prosecution and violation of double jeopardy because the next charge they would have to charge me was breaking into in the daytime, which was a lesser included offense. And unless they're going to charge me higher, they had new elements, they can't try me again. So I went in there and I showed them, and I says, based on the time that they had and everything else, I proved that it was like 18 minutes prior or 18 minutes off. It was actually a daytime burglary, not a nighttime burglary, and the case was dismissed and I walked. From that day forward, every time I got in trouble, I walked. Around that same time, still this kid, this smart kid, private school, and all these other things, and these genius kids who are sacrificed. That's the bottom line. You see, this is their sacrifice. They send their kids, even these millionaires, billionaires, they sacrifice their kids. And the way they do that is by putting them in these schools, and they don't see them. They sacrifice their love over anything raising the kids. And I can give you a name list, but I'm not gonna. It's all there. Okay? Know them from the sports, and we all compete, and we all know each other. Tight click, and they keep you in there so you're a brotherhood. And I understood that too, and I didn't like that. It made me very uncomfortable. Next thing you know, I got a needle in my arm. 17, I'm shooting heroin. I didn't really get hooked on it at that time. Here and there. I did it here and there. And I apologize for everybody trying to call me out. Messenger after. You know it's important, but I gotta do this. And then, in any event, oh, come on. No. I'm sorry. I'm just going to keep moving forward, and it might happen some more. I'm very busy, and I love it. Finally here. In any event, I went through all that, and I got into snorting coke at that time, drinking, partying. Girls, but with girls it was different. I always had a girlfriend and stuff, but I always had a problem with sex, and I wasn't gay. I always had this thing that you don't have to have sex for me to like you. That's what I seen. Girls, and they were being called sluts, and not the ones I was with, but then some of the ones I was with. And I never seen it that way, because I wanted love. I didn't have it as a kid. My brothers didn't want me around. They just keep me drunk and stoned, bring me to the park. They had to watch me. Give me a couple of sits off a beer, give me a beer, give me a couple of hits of a joint. I'd be sitting there half dead, and then they could party, and I'd be with their girlfriends, and I'd be all set. So a playpen, I was too big for a playpen, but I wasn't moving more than 6 feet in any direction. And so I went on, and time went on, and I read, and I studied, and I was going to become an international maritime lawyer, and at one point I said, I can't do this. I can't do this. I grabbed my Cameo Les Paul guitar, Sunburst. I threw it on my back. It was my birthday, January 11th. I threw it on my back with a duffel bag with my clothes, and I hit the road to come home. And it was snowing out. And within an hour, it turned into a blizzard. And I got picked up. This guy picked me up, and he drove me almost all the way. He got me within 5 miles of my house, and I was about 70 miles away. And towards the end, he asked me, let me suck your dick, I'll give you $20. And I had this hot flash over me. And I said, no. And at that point, I had this feeling, this guy is a serial killer, he's going to try to kill me. You see, I'm a small guy, but what I learned from my brothers was how to knock somebody out with a temple shot. And at this point, I'd never been in a fight. I didn't get in a fight for a while. I didn't get in a fight, maybe 20 years old, and it wasn't even a fight because I cracked the guy and knocked him out. It was one of those Iranian guys when the Shah and stuff, he owned the convenience store, he used to pull knives on everybody. And I was walking down the street one weekend in that neighborhood back in the ghetto. You know, my dad used to get pissed off because he moved out of the ghetto and everything else. And the youngest ones that were home, when we were home, we'd always go back to the ghetto. Like when I was younger in private school, when I got on the weekends, I used to want to go to my brother's house in the ghetto. And he would bring me there, and he'd throw me a dime bag a pot, which is today, I don't know, that's what they charge $100 or something, whatever. 7 grams it was. And I know that because my brothers were all pot dealers. So they had a big thing, and I'd go over, and they'd have the disco music playing, and they'd throw me a bag of pot, and they'd go out clubbing, and I would just sit there. So they didn't have nothing to do with me then either. I'd go over there to see them, to be with them, and they would have nothing to do with me. It was the same old story. So by the time I walked and got out of school, and I hitchhiked, and I got home, that guy dropped me off. I walked the rest of the way in that blizzard with my guitar and my duffel bag. And my brother Albert had just gotten out of prison. You see, when I was 11 years old, my father demanded everybody get a job if they quit school. So when I was 11, he was 16, he quit school. And he was working in a parking garage in downtown Worcester across from the Showcase Cinemas. And his boss was 18, a kid by the name of Donahue. His family owned Donahue Oil, which is these oil trucks that go and fill in the houses with oil with the little straight trucks with the big tanks in the back. And he had a .22 rifle, and they went up shooting at the street lights and billboards, and it fit this abandoned building and windows. And the next morning we woke up, it was my birthday, and I was 11 years, I was turning 11 that day. Just backed up a little, and it caused confusion. And but this had a big impact on my life. I felt like I was responsible somehow. And he hit some homeless guy that was laying on the floor right between the eyes and killed him. Hit the front page of the paper, and that was the end of my father's political careers. My father was running for Congress at the time, United States Congress, and that was the end of it. And so now I'm going about, and I'm out of school. I get home, and my brother Albert says, Dad said I got to call him. He wasn't home. He was somewhere about midnight when I got there. And he was like a pause, and I had to write it out. Dad said so. I got it. So he did, and my old man came home screaming, what the hell makes you think that you can just leave and do what you want? And I says, I can do whatever I want. I'm old enough to do what I want. You can't tell me what to do. He says, so you're not going back? And I said, no. Let's get the hell out of my house right there in the blizzard, 1 o'clock in the morning. So I went out and walked the streets. I lived on the streets almost 3 years. I became a heavy drunk. Of course, the shooting and stuff was always there, and I did it every day. But that wasn't my issue. My issue was booze. And here's a big impact on my life. There was a guy. I was sitting in this abandoned building. There's railroad tracks. What we hung around was Grand Street. It went from Main Street all the way down. And there was a set of railroad tracks that blocked it. You had to jump the tracks like a dead end. And then it got down to where we lived. There was a package store, a deli, a club here, the Cape Cod Grill, Don's Place, another bar, Gerton's here, Crushed over here, all bars everywhere. Everywhere. Every other door was a bar. And we used to hang out there, and a couple of us used to sit out there with our guitars, any song you want to hear, for $1. And we'd sit out there, and a couple of drunks come by, and they throw some money in, and between us, we could play everything. I'd do something or other, whatever we were doing. And I couldn't sing. I'm not into singing. I never felt like singing in this place since I've been here. I still don't today. There's nothing to sing about here. But I do enjoy playing. And this guy came over on the railroad tracks one morning. It was Saturday morning. It was really early. The liquor store just opened, and I remember that because this guy helped me out. This guy pulls up in a beat-up old pickup truck on the other side. It's Cobblestone Road here, and Grand Street continues. He climbs over there's 2 bars. It was like a fence, and he comes over and he goes, "Hey, man," he says, "Kid, you look like shit." And I'm going to say this guy's in his 40s. And he said, "You look like shit." And I was like this. And I was shaking, and it's pouring rain, and I was booze sick, and I was hurting. And I said, "Yeah, man, I'm hurting." And I was filthy, and I stunk. And he says, "Hang right, I'll be back in a minute, kid." And he went across the street. I saw him going to deli. He ran into the package store. A couple minutes later, he comes out. He goes back in the deli. He comes back over and he sits down with me. And he's got himself a sandwich. He's got himself a sandwich and a soda and a pack of cigarettes. And he sat it on the far side of me, and I'm sitting on the other side. And he takes a couple bites of his sandwich. I'm not paying attention. All I know is I got a bottle of Clean to Mint. And I'm drinking. I go, "Oh, man, thanks a lot, bro. I appreciate it." And within a few minutes, I started calming down. And then he pulled out the bag, and he had a 6-pack, and he sat that down. He said, "You can have that." And I said, "Okay, thanks a lot." So I got it. And he left. And I was sitting there drinking that beer. Actually, what I did the first one, I put a hole in something. Boom. I used to be able to shotgun in about 2.5 seconds of beer. I used to do that because, when you got a 6-pack and you want to get buzzed fast and you want it to affect you, that's what I used to do. I did that first one, and I cracked another one. I told him I looked. It's a pack of cigarettes. I grabbed one. And he left a sandwich. That was it. A couple weeks later, this guy, I'm standing on the corner with my friend Jimmy, and this pickup truck pulls up. And he says, "Hey, John, how you doing?" He said, "Oh, you guys want to hop in, go down to Crescent for a drink?" I said, "Sure." Now, I'm not sick, but I'm okay that day. I already had a beer or two. It was early, though, maybe noon or so, and we went down to Crescent. We went in, and he bought us 12 shots and a couple of beers and sat at the table. And he had a Coke, and we talked for a few minutes, and then he bought us another round, and he took off. And I asked Jimmy, I says, "How do you know that guy?" I said, "I met him a couple of weeks ago, man. He hooked me up with a bottle of Cream to Mint and a pack of cigarettes and a sandwich." He said, "Oh, that's John." He said, "He goes to that big Catholic church down there on Cambridge Street." He says, "He's in AA." I said, "He's in AA?" He says, "Yeah." I said, "He's cool, man." He said, "All right." A couple weeks later, me and Jimmy are hanging out every day, but Jimmy comes out and I'm on the streets, and at the time he happened to be at home, but he used to get kicked out and live in the streets. All of us did. We were all street kids. Parents used to kick us all out. They used to kick those kids out. But they were old enough. They should have been working and had their own places. They weren't kids. They were coming in. They were men coming into manhood. And Jimmy come out and he says, "Hey, John killed himself. He hung himself last night at the church. They found him dead this morning." He's a maintenance man now. And I took that with me. I remembered that guy. And we used to go to AA meetings after that. Not to get sober, but they used to to have donuts and coffee. And in the winter, it was a good place to go to get warm and get something to eat and sit in the back of the room. So that's what we used to do. I used to do. I used to do it alone a lot. And I had my best friend Gary. He used to snip him and Glenn, who's dead now. He overdosed back in about '96. Gary's still alive today. Matter of fact, he just messaged me recently on Facebook, and he's going to call me when he gets a phone. He still loves me, and I still love him. And he ended up on heroin, and a lot of things happened with him in the years I was gone in Florida. And he's huge. And I love you, God, and I'm just going to leave that alone. I love you so much. What this world did to my best friend. And he made his choices, but still. And Glennie. And anyway, I ended up going, and I got another testimony. I've been arrested a number of times. I've been in Worcester County Jail up here. I've been in Martin County Jail in Florida. I've been in St. Lucie County Jail in Florida, and Miami-Dade, all 4 county jails down there. I had, at one point, it's in my other testimony, I'm not going to go into details, it's already there. I had a case, and back when I was dating Newt Gingrich from the Speaker of the House, and he was a speaker. Some stuff came up, and next thing you know, they had me locked up in a holding cell there for 3 days. And next thing I know, they take me out. I'm wondering what's going on, because I know they got to let me go. My time's up. And about an hour before the time is up, a detective comes in, sits me down. He says, "You feel like killing yourself? You're suicidal?" I said, "No, why?" He said, "I don't know who you are." He says, "But you're facing 4 life sentences." I said, "What? What?" And that was the beginning of it. And that's my other testimony. It's a long story, and it's time's running late here. And I went and did that. And then 5 years later, I overturned my case. But I went in there the second it happened. Everything that's ever happened to me, every time I went to jail, I don't have a criminal record. I don't have a criminal record. I get an arrest sheet that'll run from here to California, but I don't have a record. I spent many years in jail, county jails. I got about 10 or 11 years in county jails in my life, 5 years in state prison. And I always knew, what am I going here for? Because I knew that law. I know everything. And I handled divorces in there for men, property settlements. There were some rich guys and a couple of millionaires, and I transfer funds for them, give them a little bit of positive attorneys, moving money around from prison and big businesses for these guys. And but that wasn't it. I was in there to the Habitual Reoffender Act and all that I seen, and that's all set up. And I won't get into that, but man, they went after you, Israel. Yeah, they did. Get you arrested the first time for 2 pieces of crack cocaine because they're in different bags. It's intent to sale, 3rd-degree felony. You go to jail. 90 days later, they say, "Hey, want to take a deal?" Sure. Thing is when you go to take a deal, what they do is they say, "Do you understand all consequences of the plea? Are you under influence of any drug or alcohol?" No. Has anybody influenced you? See, in every case, people are lying. And the judge knows it. They're committing perjury in every single plea deal that you ever took and that you ever seen. Because when they ask you, has anybody coerced you or promised you anything, and you say no, and they say that because that's a plea colloquy by the Supreme Court, they read that right out of the book. They have to. And when you say no, that's a lie, and you just committed perjury because they just told you if you go to trial, you're facing 5 years. You're going to get 5 years in mandatory if you go to trial, because that's what they do now. If you go to trial, then the judges have to give you a mandatory sentence of what that carries. So what they're doing now is they're saying, "You take a deal, or we're going to punish you." There used to be guidelines, and they have guidelines, but they override them now. Guidelines, in other words, sentencing, and it was a point system. So if you went to trial, you still stood a chance. You get 2 or 3 years on something rather than 15. But now what it is it's been this way since the 90s, since they come up with the truth in sentencing laws. And so now you take the deal, and they say, "Okay, 2 years probation, you go home today." The brother says, "Hey, yeah, cool." Or the Puerto Rican says, "Yeah, yeah, cool." Or the poor white guy goes, "Yeah, cool," and they take it and they leave. And they weren't informed of the consequences of the plea because they weren't told that on the 3rd time you get busted with 2 pieces of crack cocaine, you're going away for 30-year mandatory sentence. No parole, no early release. And this is how I was releasing guys in prison. Going back in those other cases, opening those up, getting those colloquies, and getting the notes from the lawyers to court orders, federal court orders, and proving that they were never informed previously, and therefore this time it was no good because they weren't informed, so that nullifies those other pleas. Enough of that. They get you guys all tied up and roped up and cornered in, man. And now you wonder why when I use those names of the races, the ugly ones, why I do. Because I've watched all my brothers and sisters look at themselves as that. And that's the way they look at you. And that's the way they treated you. And now, even when you're awake, I'm not saying in there's groups that have got it, but there's a large majority, you know you're the chosen people in you. I don't care what you do. I see you, I feel you. You believe that in your heart. You still believe you're less than. And that's why I shove it down your throat. I'll shove it down your throat. I'll continue to do so. I'll either kill you, you're smart enough, and you'll up to your father. You take your proper place in your proper air hole and shut up and fly straight. Take the full word. Anyway, through all of that. And then in 2008, long story, I was married. I had been living on the beach for some years. I had a painting contracting company. I lived at 9550 South Ocean Boulevard, the Islandia. You can Google that. It's a big high-rise living on the 5th floor oceanfront. I also had a place down the road, about 5 miles down, on the other end, down there, Sailfish Point. That's where Walgreens and all them live. That's a $100,000 a year mandatory golf club fee. I'm just saying that just to give you an idea where I was living. I had 2 Microsoft mansions next to me, because those guys have competitions down there. When they won over and everybody became millionaires, these guys just came in my neighborhood on the island and just started having mansion wars. I lived at a little ocean club, and we had a little girl. She was 40 years old. Her name was Charmaine Cherie. I named her that. Charmaine Cherie St. Germain. And I went into prisons and jails always knowing I had something to do. My wife, in about a year's time, had 12 DUIs. And she never spent the night in jail because I had her down as the president of the corporation. So she wouldn't feel like she was owned. I always told her, if you ever want to leave, you can leave. And I can't take anything from you. I think that's fair. People talked about abuse and all this other stuff. I recognize financial abuse immediately. That's the biggest abuse of all, and it's not recognized. Keeping a woman prisoner, not giving her a car. I was never going to do that. I just want them to love me. Like I mentioned earlier, as a kid, if you don't love me, leave, and it's it. Just tell me. You don't have to go cheating on me. Just tell me you don't love me anymore, and then go do it. Or go do it and come tell me you don't love me anymore. Don't play games. It's okay. I've never known love in this. I've never known love there. I've tried to love everybody, and I have loved so many, not just women, men, people. And eventually everybody just badmouths me and hates my guts. And that's okay. I always knew that I run around spreading poison. I spread poison. I'm nothing. I know I change people's lives. I always have. Even in those schools. Even when I was, before that, when I was a kid. Even in my drunken states, I'm talking in grammar school. I affected people. I could see it. Although I did those things, there was always something different about me, and everybody always knew it. And I used to hear it. And I was always humble about it. I was like, I just felt like I was me. I didn't understand why everybody else was the way they were, but I was the way I was, and that was it. Well, I called DCF. I left my wife because of all these DUIs, and she was taking my daughter out. What it was is I found pictures in the dresser drawer where we used to keep all the cash because I really never used banks. I never really got into loans. I did get in the Bible there, going to church, not really reading, but I knew that being not a lender or a borrower, and I thought that was cool, and I understood that, and like a better way to put it, as genius as I was, I understood it was stupid. I'm not paying 3 times more for a car and putting top insurance on this whole gig. Even if they sold it to me for what it was, and I paid an extra $100. They make me put top insurance on it, and all of that after 5 years of paying for the car. Come on, a $20,000 car costs you $45,000. I'm not a gambling man. Remember, I don't watch sports. I'm not placing a bet. They're legalized bookies. How old are you? Have you had any accidents? Yeah. Let's put a spread on this. I've always seen things for what they were. Simple. The genius that I was, and the genius that people think I am, want the truth. The truth is, I'm simple. I never read anything to try to understand it. I read it to absorb it. And I understood it without thinking. And today I still don't think. I tell you the truth. I'm just simple. I keep everything simple. And it's just the way it is. They took my little girl when I called DCF. And I won't get into that, it's a long story. But that night, when that social worker came running in and out the door, for about 4 hours through the middle of the night, after I called for help, not only for help to the extent that I needed to get something between my daughter and my wife, and to get my wife straightened out. And that wasn't because I wanted her back or anything. I would have. It didn't matter. What I wanted is my daughter to have a mom that was straight. Because she was straight. She got straight when I met her. And I didn't date her. And she had been a heroin junkie I knew a few years earlier, and for 20 years. I knew some things about her, and she had straightened out. And one day she walks up, and remember, I'm shallow. She was smoking hot. Valley Burntnell's twin sister on steroids. Strip joint, bartender. But she wasn't a stripper, so she thought that was justifiable. And that was okay with me. I don't judge people. Although you think I do. That book's just full of judgments. I don't judge you. I just give you that book. And then you judge yourself, and then you tell me I'm judging you. I'm not judging you. That's your book. And then the ones who come to you and cling to the light, and that's your book too then. When you get the spirit and you get the wisdom. I treat you just like I treat the lawyers and the judges. They're your books. They're their law books. I'll shove them down your throat. And I do. And I win. They can't argue. I take your word and I shove it down your throat. Nobody can argue. And I don't even quote the thing. I don't even read it. Because it started unfolding to me with my daughter, who I was, where I came from. When they took my little girl, it broke my heart. I was crushed. When they took her screaming out the door, they said, we're going to take you so you'll be safe with us. She said, well, Daddy, I'm safe with Daddy. She was 3.5 years old. August 9th this year. She'll be 12. And I haven't seen her since. I sued him. Well, I got her back, and then they pulled a smart one. I only had her for 3 months. I sued him. I closed down Hillsborough Kids Inc. in Tampa. I've said it in my other video. Go look on Facebook. Hillsborough Kids Inc. It's been closed down since 2011. And not because they stole my little girl. You see, when that day happened, they took my little girl, I hugged that social worker. And I told him, I said, you know, you're just doing the job, but I'm going to ruin your life. I'm sorry. Just like that. And I hugged him, kissed him on the neck. A black brother, about 30. And the deputy was with him, an older hardcore guy. I hugged him, and I kissed him on the neck. I said, I know you're doing your job, but this was wrong. You got the wrong guy. And when I say that, what I mean is you just screwed with the wrong guy. I am going to destroy you because you're the ones who did it. I'm sorry you do this for a paycheck, but you're going to pay the price because I got to get you to get to your boss, to get from your boss to the governor, to get from the governor to the attorney general, because I'm taking you all down. I ain't playing your shit. I'm taking you down. You did this to me because you did it to other people. Just like when I went to prison, they did what they did to me because they did it to other people. That's what Father always showed me. You go in there and you do this. That voice was in there. You go in there and you do this. And what happened to you had to happen so you could take care of it because you have to be a victim. And then you're going to go in the mud with these people. And you're going to grab their hand and you're going to see the gates of hell. And that's what I tell people, hold my hand. The gates of hell are right there. Come on. I know how to go through. I promise you I won't let go. I'll take you through to the other side. Every inmate, every prisoner, the lifers, the death rows, the burglars, the drug dealers, the rapists. No child molester ever did. And I held their hands and I walked through that gate and I showed them the way. Through this gun. And they used to say to me a lot, God sent you to me. Mothers and old ladies calling me on the phone. See, I started waking up. I realized that Father was telling me, you're an angel. I sent you here for this. This is your work. And I've been walking bold ever since. And this has been going on for 20 years now. I'm 54 years old. And here and there through my life, I just keep walking bold. But every time I get tied down like that marriage, it had to be. And although I was doing things and giving money and paying well, and I would do anything for anybody, and I was giving money to a drunk on the side, I wouldn't just give him money. I'd sit down and go and buy a six-pack and a pack of cigarettes like the guy I had around the front. I went into AA in the after the prison thing, and in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and I'd stick my hand up because I went in there to get the people out of the bullshit of you're an alcoholic for the rest of your life. You're not. You're not. I bear witness. You don't have to ever do it again. Look at me. I'm not cute. I don't care. I don't care what I look like. I'll groom myself and comb my hair properly if I'm going into a courtroom. If I need to look like Rome, I'll go in Rome and I'll kick their ass right where they stand. If I'm walking, I'm dealing with people on the street, then I'll look like the street. And that's where I am. I'm not in some great neighborhood. I'm not in a bad neighborhood. I'm in a neighborhood of, we're going to help you out. We're going to give you some welfare and some food stamps, some Section 8 for a nice little place, just as long as Daddy don't live with you. Destroyed your families. Gave you restraining orders after that. My last Supreme Court case in the state of Massachusetts, it was. I was dragged up here through that lawsuit suing them. I ended up in cuffs in Massachusetts for robbery of the Massachusetts State Lottery in 1993. I wasn't even here. I was never wanted. I had gotten stopped once or twice on traffic stops, not nothing big, and nothing ever came up. When I was in prison, nothing came up. All of a sudden, I take my daughter, I file a suit, they close down. The woman involved in my case, or who was a supervisor in the office of the state attorney's office, who pulled this crap that I was going after. When you see this, this isn't about my daughter. It is, but it's not. Just like Robin and everybody else, this takes second place. It's what did they do to others? And you're not going to do it again. It was you too. And the 10 others who know you, or 20 others who know you. I can't change the world, but I'll change your lives. And those who know you. And you'll never pull this shit again. In 2013, I fought my last case in Massachusetts Supreme Court. All arguments before a single justice. Under this particular rule that has never been executed in the state of Massachusetts, the foundation of this country. The judge was surprised. She was shocked. They had to wait 2 weeks to research to see what to do in this hearing. They didn't know what to do. I had the law clerk, who was a lawyer that works for the judge in the Supreme Court, a lawyer, not a kid in law school, to ask me to help him out, to see what the judge needed to do and how this was going to go. And I changed the law in the state of Massachusetts, was the last one I ever done. And Father told me at that point, net pictures are on Facebook of me in there, just bearing witness. I don't care. I did my work. All the stolen children were on my Facebook. The people I fought with over in England, Stuart Young, very good man, very good in the law. Case of Kelly Conn. 3 days. We were on Skype around the clock. She was going to jail for 2 years because they stole her children, and she was screaming in the press about it. Now they're going to lock her up for contempt. And we researched and we did that right online. I spent those last couple of years from 2011 to 2013 fighting in the World Court in Belgium for Nigel Cooper. He was chief of security for the United Nations, and the high-tech computer, he had a security system, and he had a daughter that he put everything in her name at 5 years old, and he got over $1 billion for that, what he did in that patent and everything, and he left, and he's in Belgium, and his wife came and stole his daughter on a visit and brought her to England, and we had one as far as getting a warrant for the Queen of England and the Prime Minister in the World Court to return that child or have him arrested. That's a long story, I won't get into it. Of course, they didn't obey and then we moved to get for one of the show cars in the World Court with Nigel Cooper, and that's right about the time the father said enough's enough. We're all done with this kid. He told me, right on his couch. When you see that, the Seat of the Ages video, because I have other videos before this about all kinds of other things that I was doing, more than just this in there. I was slammed down on this couch on this side, and it was less than a minute. And I saw all creation from the beginning of my creation. And he told me everything. He told me everything before me. I love you all. Healing the sick, making the blind see, and even raising the dead. The sole purpose of shaking the world to say, hey, look ye here. Please look to our Father. Not for some ego, not for some paycheck. We're in this for love.